Tennessee football has 5 new coaches, 18 new players, a new quarterback, and plenty of new reasons to both praise and complain about UT's work in the transfer portal. So let's get into the news and into the gripes. Welcome to the Volunteer State. I'm Tennessee beat writer Adam Sparks, along with John Adams of the Knoxville News Sentinel. We are back after a lengthy hiatus. That is a break from the pod, not from working altogether. It's actually been an incredibly busy week or busy stretch of news over the past few weeks since UT lost the Music City Bowl, got into the very, very hectic offseason. But we haven't had a podcast episode in the past few weeks. John, I think from now on, we should just sign off somewhere before Christmas and just tell our listeners, hey, we'll see you after the transfer portal closes. Because that's about what it's been. I think it was like that last year. Because in the past few weeks, we were off the pod for bowl coverage, for holiday travel, for extra travel. We missed for an illness. Not John, that was me. I had the flu for about a week or so. And finally for the portal. Full disclosure, we had actually planned an episode of this podcast the past 2 or 3 weeks, but every time we got into it and ready to crank it up, there'd be new transfer portal news coming. So we would hold off to see what would happen to make sure what we recorded was not obsolete by the time it was published. And the big moving target was quarterback. John, I mean, it's literally been, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 weeks that we have said, let's do a podcast this day. And then I would call you up and say, well, hold off. They may be getting fill in the blank quarterback. And we've got a lot to talk about in a short period of time, but that's where I want to start, quarterbacks. Full disclosure, the way we usually do this, that I do this, is when the transfer portal's opening, you have pre-writes, what we call pre-writes. I've talked about them on the show before. You have guys that you think are going into the portal, and so you write the story ahead of time so it's ready to go once they announce. And then you have other guys you think Tennessee is going to add from the portal, and so you write those stories. I wrote, 40 stories in the past month, and maybe 20 of them published because, guys, what you thought would happen didn't necessarily happen. Quarterback was the one that I wrote the most. I think I wrote about 10 quarterbacks going to Tennessee. The big ones you can imagine, Brendan Sorsby. They tried to get him, never could get him to campus. Sam Levitt came to campus. They didn't get him. LSU got him. Ty Simpson decided to go to the NFL draft. Looks like a good decision now. Bo Pribula, Tennessee was a little lukewarm on. He ended up at Virginia. Justin Lampson. Now, that wasn't a guy that you heard much about, and nothing came of it. But and I'm not saying Tennessee was pushing hard for Justin Lampson, but there was, let's say, Justin Lampson's agent was reaching out to see what the interest would be at a handful of schools. If you don't know who Justin Lampson is, don't feel like you're in the dark there. He was Montana State's quarterback. A couple weeks ago, a week or so ago, he won the FCS national title. He was the MVP game in the national title game that was played in Nashville. But nothing happened with that. He's returned to Montana State. And finally, Colorado backup Ryan Staub. Ryan Staub, we knew from the beginning that's who the guy they would get. But that's who they got. Colorado backup Ryan Staub. 12 games, 2 starts, and 3 seasons at Colorado. He's basically the backup. 2 seasons of eligibility left. Last season, 30 of 55 passes, 427 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He also ran for a touchdown. So this is on paper, a so-so backup from Colorado. And that means UT will go into spring practice with George McIntyre, Faison Brandon, and Ryan Staub in a 3-way quarterback competition. That's assuming Joey Aguilar doesn't get some kind of a Hail Mary type news from the courts that gives him another year of eligibility. So, John, let's put Aguilar aside, and let's say it is George McIntyre, Faison Brandon, Ryan Staub. The most likely to start the season opener in 2026? Put those in order from likeliest to least likely that they start the opener.
Wow, that's a real guessing game. I would think George McIntyre, simply looking at the depth chart as it now stands, that he would be the logical successor to Joey Aguilar. Faison Brandon, one of the top recruits in the country, athletic, big arm guy. He's got a shot. I can't imagine that a third string quarterback from Colorado, a third string quarterback on a 3-9 team, could become Tennessee's quarterback. I think of him as depth. You need depth at that position. I think of him as the not the successor to Joey Aguilar, but the successor to Gaston Moore, who filled in and as a backup. He was the number 2 guy for a while, but I just think McIntyre starts out, and I think the biggest concern would be with his physical build. Is he strong enough physically, enough weight on him? I'm not saying he needs to fatten up, but it's as though he needs protective armor to be able to manage those SEC size hits you get as a quarterback. But I think he would start out as a quarterback, but look back in the Josh Heupel era. We go back to the Joe Milton, Hendon Hooker debate. His first season, Joe Milton started. He started 2 games, and then Hendon Hooker became the starter. So I wouldn't count out Faison Brandon as a true freshman.
Yeah, if we just look at Staub, like Hendon Hooker was a 4-star prospect who started a dozen games or so at Virginia Tech. So he was a starter caliber player. Joe Milton had started some at Michigan, and he was a high 4-star prospect. And so he was a starter caliber player. Ryan Staub, to me, seems somewhere in between those guys and Gaston Moore, the walk-on backup third stringer that Tennessee had for a couple of years. But probably closer to Gaston Moore, you would think. This is a guy that it's played a little bit at Colorado. Now here's the thing. I think Staub will. I wouldn't be shocked if Staub plays the best football of his life in Josh Heupel's system. Because every quarterback has their career year in Josh Heupel's system. It's quarterback friendly. If you can pick it up at all, it's an offense where you can complete, 65% of your passes. It's if you can run, which Staub can, there's opportunities for the quarterback run game. But I don't think they didn't get Ryan Staub to be a starter. They got Ryan Staub because they need a third quarterback and they need an emergency guy, and they needed a guy who at least played some. So you didn't want to just throw in another freshman into the mix. Between those 3 guys starting, so yeah, George McIntyre. If you were putting odds on it, George McIntyre is the odds-on favorite to start the opener. And I would say all the way to the Georgia Tech game, which is their first real opponent. And that's, I don't know, week 2, week 3. I don't have the schedule in front of me. But so if it's George McIntyre, if things work out well, I think George McIntyre at best would be sort of a point guard, a distributor. He knows the offense, should know the offense better than the other 2 guys because he's been in it for a year. He is an accurate thrower. He's a smart quarterback. He has not played, but the few times he has played, and we saw him in the spring game last year. I've seen him in practice some. He throws a good ball, throws a high completion percentage. I think they know, at least for a freshman, now redshirt freshman, I think the coaches feel like he has a good enough grasp on the offense. In other words, he knows where the ball is supposed to go more times than not. So if it's him, you're just hoping for him to distribute the ball, to know when to get into a run play, to give it to all SEC back to Sean Bishop, to be able to manage the protections up front with really 4 starters coming back on the offensive line, and there's been some pieces added there. And a guy who could hopefully take advantage of 2 good receivers coming back and some really good young receivers coming in. That's what you hope to get, George McIntyre. That's why he'd be the odds-on favorite. He's a guy that you feel confident maybe that he could just do an adequate to pretty good job of getting the ball to those type guys. If it's Faison Brandon, I think it's a guy that he would have to learn the system, the basics of the system in the spring. You would go to Faison Brandon because, number one, George McIntyre just has not panned out. And number two, you need an athletic running quarterback because Faison Brandon can run. And that's why you would have to go to him. And that would, I think, signal that there may be deficiencies elsewhere too, that you didn't think you necessarily had the run game completely in place. If you thought maybe your defense was not up to par yet. So you had to have sort of an extra dynamic element to your offense to get it going. If it's Ryan Staub, it would mean he, again, would play the best football of his life. It means he excelled in the system, that he fit it. Joey Aguilar, just fit in the system really well. Ryan Staub has not played anywhere near as much football as Joey Aguilar did. But if Staub fit in the system and just wowed them in spring practice, that would have to happen. But also, it would for Staub to start, it would require George McIntyre to fail, I think, because I don't think they would go to Staub unless they had to go to Staub. So that's sort of the order I would put them in: McIntyre, Faison Brandon, Ryan Staub to start the opener. John, is the order different if we're saying who's starting in November? Because let's remember, this is a pretty tough schedule. I mean, this is a schedule where there's going to be 9 conference games plus the Georgia Tech game. You're going to have a number of national title contenders on there. It's a record that if Tennessee does not play well on offense, they could go 6-6. They could also go, 9-3 or better. Who knows if things turn out well? But if things go south for the starter at the beginning of the year, do things get reordered in November? John, I think you and I agree then George is the odds-on favorite, even by a little bit, to start the opener. What's the order of guys starting in November of those 3 guys?
Well, as you said, I mean, that would require, if there is a change, it would imply failure on McIntyre's part or injury. Josh Heupel is not afraid to correct a mistake. He did that in 2021, his first season, when Joe Milton just wasn't getting the job done. He had an injury, but let's face it, Hendon Hooker came in and played well against Pittsburgh in a relief role, almost won the game. And from that point on, it was pretty obvious that Hooker would be the quarterback. Josh Heupel didn't keep him second team because Milton had suffered an injury. He went ahead and made the move he needed to make, to his credit. No point in delaying something like that. So I think if, you talk about this system being quarterback friendly, it is, but it's also dependent on a quarterback being able to do a lot of things. We talked about Joey Aguilar. His nice touch on the deep ball was a real addition to Tennessee's offense because his predecessors, Nico Iamaleava and Joe Milton, did not execute that so well. And you could see the improvement right away when Aguilar hit those deep throws. It was so meaningful for the offense. Another thing which Hendon Hooker demonstrated so effectively, if one of your options is a quarterback run. Now, Aguilar couldn't run like Hendon Hooker, but he could run for a first down or a touchdown even when need be. If the defense gave him that running lane, he could take it. So he didn't hesitate. But ideally, you want a guy who can throw the deep ball, who also can run some. And I don't know if McIntyre can do those things. Maybe he can, but that's for an ideal situation. So I don't think Heupel will hesitate if it's not working. He can't afford to. You mentioned the schedule. I mean, Josh Heupel just went 8-5. The program's not going in the right direction now all of a sudden. So he can't afford another drop. So I think he would be inclined to make a change for whatever reason, be it injury or if because of ability or production that say McIntyre didn't get it done. You don't want to do that. I know Heupel wouldn't want to do that, but I think he would do it, and I don't think he would hesitate.
Yeah, I think for Hype to go with one quarterback and switch to the other, and granted, we'll have a much better feel for this when spring practice comes along in March. But for Hype to make a change, it would have to be that things weren't working out with whoever he goes with. Let's say it's McIntyre, and you needed that dynamic running quarterback element to things. And so maybe you would go to Faison. You would be giving up some of the playbook doing that, because I just don't see a freshman coming in and being able to function really, really well in this offense just immediately. I mean, it took Nico a full year, and like you said, he still was slow in processing it. So maybe if things are going south in the season, he would start with McIntyre, go to Faison late in the year. If he I don't see them starting the year with Faison, so I don't see it going the other way around. I think it would go to Faison later in the year. But again, we'll see in spring practice how he picks up the offense. For Staub to switch to Staub would take a lot. That would be a Josh Heupel on the hot seat, and he's just got to figure out how to, win a couple games in November to save his job. I just don't see that the season going necessarily in that direction. But the biggest is injury. I mean, you mentioned that, John. George McIntyre came in as a really tall, skinny kid with a lot of ability, and right now, a year later, he is a really tall, skinny kid with a lot of ability, and not much has changed there. He gained some weight, I remember, initially when we talked to him, maybe it was in the spring last year, he had put on like 15 pounds or something. But my understanding is most or all that weight came off during the year. And by the way, that's an easy segue into the news of the day. We're recording this on Tuesday. And earlier in the day, Tennessee hired Derek Owings as its new strength and conditioning coach. Josh Heupel let go of his only strength coach that he had over the past like 8-9 years. Kurt Schmidt, he had him as a strength coach all of his seasons at Tennessee, also at UCF, and then he had worked with him at Missouri before that. He let him go, did not retain him, and then brought in Derek Owings. You don't know that name. People don't know strength coaches' names, but you will know that he was the strength coach at Indiana up until, as we record this, up until last night. When Indiana won the national title, he was on the sideline. Derek Owings is getting $1.2 million from Tennessee. That's coordinator money. He is now third on the coaching staff in terms of pay, behind the two coordinators, Jim Knowles and Joey Halsey, are the only two guys on Josh Heupel's staff that make more than that. To give you sort of an idea, strength coach pay from the previous strength coach was $475,000. So that was like in the bottom third of coaches on the staff. Now it's third overall of 11 coaches. So it's a philosophy change is what it is. When you say I'm going to give my strength coach coordinator money, you are saying this is as important as either coordinator. And a lot of that comes from the fact that Josh Heupel had the realization at some point during the season that his team was soft, that his team physically did not match up with the top teams on their schedule, mentally, physically, all the sort of things. And a lot of attention is going to be put on George McIntyre, that this strength coach, his number one job is to put weight and strength on George McIntyre. That is one of his main jobs immediately. But he's just got to put some girth and some toughness to this roster overall. But George McIntyre will be the guy that we notice, or whether or not there's some progress between now and spring practice. John, there was a photo on Instagram I noticed that a lot of people have seen that George McIntyre put out, I think it was about a week or so ago, of him and some of his wide receivers working out in Miami. And the wide receivers are all have their shirts off, and look like they have good reason to have their shirts off. And George McIntyre was in a T-shirt. And I thought, that's a guy who doesn't have enough yet to show off. I would also be in a T-shirt, but for different reasons. The too fat rather than the too skinny. George is not showing that off yet. Maybe he'll by fall he'll have more of a body that he would want to show off. I don't want to joke too much there. There are some dietary health limitations that George has had. We may ask him more about that if he wants to divulge some of that in the spring, but it's already been somewhat reported, hinted at. So, but there are ways to gain weight, a number of ways, and that's the job of Derek Owings, the new strength coach. John, I mean, if George is healthy, and that's a big if he's healthy, I mean, it's his job is it his job to lose? Should we put it that way? If he's healthy, uninjured, and physically can do it, is this his job to lose?
I guess you can put it that way because he's really competing with a true freshman. Faison Brandon comes in here, and his physical prowess will not be in question. It will be how fast can he assimilate this offense. And go back to Nico Yamaleava. He came in here. He was red-shirted. Everybody thought he was ready to go as a redshirt freshman in 2024, but he was really he was slow in the decision-making process in the passing game. He just didn't seem to process information quickly enough. The ball didn't come out of his hands fast enough. It just looked like he was working in a little bit of a slow motion. So if McIntyre can do all those things, maybe his weight won't matter so much if he can really run the offense and he can. I remember when Peyton Manning came in here, 1994. When Peyton Manning left Tennessee, he was developed physically. He wasn't some skinny kid, no string bean. He had a layer of muscle on him. And I really believe that's one reason Peyton Manning returned for his senior season. He could have gone after his junior year and been the number one pick, but he knew his dad played in the NFL. They knew very well what it took. And I think that was a factor. And I think he wanted to have a coat of NFL armor on before he went to that next level. And it worked out for him. But I remember watching him as a true freshman and thinking, boy, if he gets hit, he might break in half. But he never really got hit that hard because he had such a quick release. And because he knew he was so advanced mentally and so advanced with the playbook, even as a true freshman, he knew where the ball was supposed to go. He knew where the coverage was. I mean, I'm not comparing McIntyre to one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history.
Sure.
But I'm just saying there are ways around that. Peyton Manning didn't get hurt. And I can still remember him in the Gator Bowl as a freshman rushing. The game was in Gainesville, but because of he making about a 15-yard run one time when he had to, when the running lane was there. I can remember those bootlegs. So the offense functioned through him. I think Josh Heupel could amend the offense for McIntyre's strengths. But, durability, you can't always measure that in pounds. Some guys are built like a Greek god and they can't stay healthy. There's a tendon here, a ligament there, a cartilage somewhere else. And the next thing you know, he's sat on the bench in more games than he started and spent most of his career in rehab. So I guess it's a little bit unfair in a way to say, well, George McIntyre is just too skinny. He'll never make it. This can be overcome. I don't know what you got to see him play before you can say, well, I just don't see how he can do it at his size, or I don't know how he can process the offense. Maybe he's really good at all these things, and maybe that will won't matter the size element.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Number one is that George is he's a pretty mobile guy. People don't necessarily think of him in that way because he's a tall, lanky guy, but he's pretty mobile. So if he does play, he will run. Now that could open him up to the possibility of injuries, but he will run. Now he will not run like Faison would. They're not going to they wouldn't have a long list of quarterback runs, but he's mobile. I have no idea if he'll stay healthy or not. You're right. Sometimes we can overthink these things a little bit. You mentioned Nico. I thought about how we need to transition our mind a little bit to what the situation that George is in, because up to this point, all through the portal, I think we looked at George's situation as being similar to Jake Merklinger a year ago. Jake Merklinger, the coaching staff thought he's not ready yet, so they brought in a veteran and then sort of said, hey, it's going to be a competition, but we all, assumed that Joey Aguilar would win the job. And when Joey Aguilar did win the job, that told Jake Merklinger, hey, when December comes, you need to get ready for the portal. And that's what happened. George McIntyre, we thought that may happen too. Now, if they had brought in Sorsby or Sam Levitt, McIntyre would have sat behind an established starter like that, and then you'd see what happened the next year. If it was going to be Bo Perbula and a guy of that caliber, it was going to be a similar situation to Merklinger and Joey Aguilar, where you thought the guy that they brought in would be the starter, but the young guy, Merklinger a year ago, McIntyre this year, was going to get at least a fair shot. But if they didn't win it, that would tell them to get in the portal because they couldn't beat out a mid-tier transfer. Now I think we have to sort of transition our mind into George is not in the Jake Merklinger situation. George is in the Nico situation. I don't think they meant for him to be there because they were chasing established starters in the portal. But he is now a redshirt freshman that is going to come in as the front runner, maybe by just a hair, but he's the front runner going into spring practice as a starter. It's his job if he can take it, and that's the situation that Nico was in. There was not a surefire guy in front of Nico. There's not in front of George. So it's sink or swim for George McIntyre. He has every chance in the world to win this job, and maybe he will. But quarterback was just one portal element in a really, really wide conversation of what Tennessee was doing in the portal. They did not do well in the portal at quarterback because they went after high-priced guys, premier quarterbacks, did not land any of them. I think they did really well on defense. Now, as we record this, Tennessee has 18 players that they have in the portal. By the time you hear this, they may add a defensive lineman or so. So they're going to be somewhere around 20. Now, a long snapper was one of them. A kicker was another. Louisville's Cooper Renvier, I'm not sure how to pronounce it yet. He is the punk rock Max Gilbert, as I call him. He's got sort of bleach blonde spiked hair. He plays poker a lot. If you see his, he talks about Texas Hold'em on Twitter. He's got both ears pierced. John, and some people think that's a big deal. Others don't. In my generation, John, I probably have never told you the story of my older brother, when he got this is in the 90s in rural Tennessee. He got his ear pierced a couple different ways. And for whatever that means to people now, in the 90s in rural Tennessee, if your teenage son came home with his ear pierced to a very conservative rural family, and did not ask his parents. that was a little bit of an issue. And my dad, the way my dad handled that was it was raining outside. It was a really bad thunderstorm. My brother walked in, sat down, kind of tilted his head toward my dad so he could see, as the rebellious son he is, that he got his ear pierced. And my dad, knowing that my brother wanted him to blow up on him, did not. He just walked out of the room, went in the garage where my brother had parked his Honda Accord, and backed it out of the garage into the downpour of a rainstorm, rolled down all the windows, walked back inside, sat there for a few minutes, and then told my brother, "Hey, your car's windows are down." And my brother said, "My car's in the garage." He said, "No, it's not," and then walked away.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is the passive aggressive Sparks household.
Yeah.
And my brother got the message. This is my house, my garage, my rules, not yours. My brother now does not have either ear pierced, and he is a banker who wears a tie, and is so he ended up being a less rebellious than he was as a teenager.
That's a great story.
Yeah. So Cooper Ranvier, he's the punk rock Max Gilbert. He is your new kicker. Also got a long snapper, got the quarterback we talked about, a couple of offensive linemen, a running back, a tight end. Those are pieces, some of them depth pieces. The offensive tackle will have a shot to start, but there's a few combinations they could use in the offensive line. I want to spend the next few minutes, John, just talking about what they did on defense. I count. So let's see. On defense, they added 7 DBs, a linebacker, a D tackle, 2 edge rushers. So that's 11 guys that they added to Jim Knowles' new defense. Jim Knowles, along with 3 new position coaches, so it's a different defensive staff. It's different defensive players. John, I count 7 new starters on defense. If I'm making a depth chart today, which I have, I'm counting 7 new starters on the defense. The Penn State edge rusher, I think, will start. The Penn State D tackle, I think, will start. The Penn State linebacker, I think, will start. And then 4 of the 5 DBs, I think, will be starters. I think will probably be new players. Both safeties. That's DeJuan Lane, came from Penn State. TJ Metcalf, they got from Michigan. Quay Moss from Kansas State. I think he'll probably be the nickel. Kyan Lee from Auburn was a starter there. I think he'll start at corner. So really, I think Ty Redmond will probably start at corner. But even if you go to the backups on the depth chart in the secondary, there's 2 or 3 guys that they brought in from the portal I think will probably have a pretty good shot as being the backups or even compete to start. So, John, I give them I give them an A- for defense. Am I sugarcoating that a little bit, or do you also see them as having a pretty high grade in what they added on defense?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe B or B plus. Obviously Tennessee had to make great improvements defensively, and when I look at the resumes of the guys they've added, you can see where they would be the starters. But remember, the bar is set really, really low here. This wasn't a mediocre defense. It was a bad defense. It's one of Tennessee's worst defenses. So that's important. I think it would be really troublesome if you said, well, I think 2 or 3 of these transfers could start. No, you need more than 2 or 3, and I think Tennessee's done that. We're still, I think, counting on potential somewhat more than production here. The Penn State guys, it's not as though they're bringing in all these guys who are all mainstays or all Big Ten conference guys, and some of them are more. It's more like they've got an upside. However, the fact that Jim Knowles was a defensive coordinator at Penn State, and he knows these guys as well as anybody, he believes in them. That this is his new team. He wants to know. He's looking at video of what he has at Tennessee, and then he knows what he had at Penn State. So I think it's not as though they're bringing in players. Yes, with a lot of these players, the bringing them in is based on potential, but you have more insight into their potential because Jim Knowles coached these guys in practice every day. So I think that's a really good sign. I think Tennessee's defense will be better. What I wonder about, though, and he's certainly a very renowned strategist. He has a great reputation Jim Knowles does. But what I wonder, can these players tackle? Because
That's important.
yeah, I thought Tim Bikes. I mean, if you're a defense coordinator and your defense plays the way Tennessee's did last year, you're going to take the heat. And he got fired. He also got hired right away by Alex Golish, the new coach at Auburn, who had worked here at Tennessee with Bikes. So it's not as though all of a sudden they think the word on Tim Bikes is, oh, the guy just can't coach. The biggest problem Tennessee had was with its defense. These guys didn't execute. They couldn't tackle. I'm not saying, I mean, I think a change had to be made. However, I think it's really important in one of Knowles' priorities, I think, Adam, is to instill a toughness. You mentioned that earlier with the strength coach. I think Jim Knowles has a hand in this too. You can't have a soft defense in the SEC. Tennessee needs to toughen up on defense.
Yeah, I wonder. So let me hone in on that a little bit. A microcosm of what I think Tim Banks prioritized versus what they hope Jim Knowles prioritizes is what happened at safety over the past year. Jacoby Thomas, as we know, transferred out of Tennessee after spring practice, transferred to Miami. He was one of the best safeties in the country this year, was the MVP of the Fiesta Bowl, played and lost to Indiana in the national title game. That was one of the few guys that I can find over the years, the transfer portal, where Tennessee let a guy go and they regretted it. So Tennessee, bats about 950 on those guys, but they lost out on him. Jacoby Thomas was as we saw this year in Miami, was a physical, hard hitting, headhunter, hard tackling type player. He was a guy that a receiver or really a running back in the middle of the field did not want Jacoby Thomas near him. Just a physical presence. That's exactly the thing that Tennessee lacked at safety this year. Now, if you go back in the spring and say maybe they should have guaranteed him a starting spot or given him the hints that he was going to start or give him starter money in NIL, that sort of thing to keep him. If it had done that back then, I don't, in hindsight, that would have been the right decision. But if you'd have said back then, hey, they're going to give some of Boo Carter's money to Jacoby Thomas, people would be like, Boo Carter is preseason All-SEC. What do you mean? If they would have given Ricky Gibson's money, you would say, well, Ricky Gibson's your starting corner, is going to be in the NFL in a year, and on down the line. But specifically, if you look at safety, Andre Turrentine was, I think, a priority, a guy that Tim Banks really leaned on. Andre Turrentine was a poor tackler this year. He just was. He missed a lot of tackles in critical situations, but he knew where everybody was supposed to be. We're supposed to be in this coverage. I'm supposed to be over here. You're supposed to be over there. Nobody's going to get behind me, that sort of thing. Jacoby Thomas had less of that, but he had more of hit a guy to the point where targeting seemed likely on almost every play, for better or worse. And I think they lost some of their physicality and Tim Banks coached safeties. That's the other thing. He wasn't just defensive coordinator. He coached safeties. And his priority at some point was, I need a guy out there who knows exactly where they're supposed to be. And I think Tennessee, they needed that, but they got a little too far away from, I just need a guy that can play football really well, and in a way that this defense needs. You see a little bit of that at corner, even if you look in the secondary, because for years, Willie Martinez and Tim Banks both said, like, we prioritize more than anything as a versatile guy, a guy that can play all the different positions. We want a guy who can play corner or nickel. He can slide into safety. We can just move them around. They know everybody's position, know where they're supposed to be. Well, then they get Jermod McCoy, and by the way, and they would also have safeties stay on their side. We're not going to prioritize your skill set. Everybody just plays everywhere. But then they get Jermod McCoy, and suddenly they have a lockdown corner, and it's not important whether or not he knows also how to play nickel in an emergency or he can stay on his side. He went wherever the best receiver of the other team was. And then they got Colton Hood. They did that also with him some. And so I thought they needed more of that. And I think Jim Knowles, they would like to have more of that, of go pick out good football players who know where they're supposed to be, yes, but are just good football players and are an asset to the defense and not merely just know where they're supposed to be. I think we will be able to judge this portal class on defense at the end of the season, whether or not their familiarity made up for maybe what was deficient a little bit in talent. Amari Campbell is the linebacker they got. He started at Penn State, got a whole lot of tackles, started at North Carolina before that, got a lot of tackles. He's familiar with Jim Knowles' defense, so that gives him sort of an extra bump to say he's going to fit in really quickly. But if you look at his stats, what's the difference between him and Jeremiah Thielander? A guy that's been around, played a lot of games, made a lot of tackles. So familiarity's got to be sort of a separator here of going from okay to good. Chaz Coleman, the edge rusher, played a little bit, but again, like you said, we're going on potential a lot here. So they've got to fit a lot of pieces together that could be really good or just could be mediocre. The big selling point with a lot of these guys is just that they know the defense and they'll be sliding right in and know what to do. I thought it was really important that they added Penn State transfers at all three levels of the defense: D-line, linebacker, and secondary. So that means the returning players have a guy in their group that they can look to and say, wait, how do you do this? How did y'all do this last year? And I think that's important because Tennessee does have, up front, they have David Hobbs, Nathan Robinson, Tyree Weathersby. Linebacker Arion Carter is back, pulled himself out of the NFL draft, is coming back. That linebacker group could be really good, certainly deep. And, you've got some pieces in the secondary, Ty Redmond, Idris Farouk, but they're going to sink or swim with their transfers. And I think that's just going to be the story of this. John, we just got a few minutes left. There's so many topics I want to get to today, but we've got next week. Just sort of a reaction to the last two national title games. Ohio State won it the year before this with high school recruits that they built up in their system, and then they just added a few key portal guys. Georgia has done that too. Indiana, who just won the national title, added a whole lot of transfers. Now, some of the transfers were James Madison transfers, so you can kind of, and that's where Cignetti came from, so you can kind of see those maybe as more high school recruits because they've been with him the whole time. But that's still sort of two different ways. Miami did it a lot with transfers. Is Tennessee building this team in the right way? They have a top 10 recruiting class. They added portal guys, but not 30 or 40. They've added 18. Is Josh Heupel building this team in the right way?
I don't really think so, Adam. I think the days of a great high school recruiting class, the impact that has, it's declined significantly. I just don't think that matters. I wouldn't want to sign more than 15 high school players at the very most. You're using Indiana as an example. Another example is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, how Clark Lee transformed his program. And remember, Clark Lee was in danger of losing his job, really. Just an awful start there at Vanderbilt. And what did he do? He went whole hog into the transfer portal, brought in, but he didn't just get transfers. He got really experienced players. I think Kirk Cignetti did some of that with Indiana too. These guys you talked about production. These guys had produced. Well, Clark Lee goes out. He had a slew of graduate transfers. These guys, 22, 23-year-old guys. I just think experience matters so much now in college football. And so I think Tennessee needs to pull back on the high school, on the number of players, certainly not the quality, but on the number, and go really heavy into the portal. And I think Georgia, as well as it's done under Kirby Smart going forward, I think Georgia is going to slip unless it does more in the portal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the test case. How long do they do it? How long does Kirby do it the way that he's done it? I mean, I think the easy answer to this is twofold. Number one, there's different ways to build a team, to build a playoff / national title contending team. You can do it through the portal. You can do it through homegrown recruits and just keep as many as you can. But the second part of that is, I think anybody just needs to blend the two. You've got to recruit well. You've got to do good in the portal. You got to do both of those, or it's just not going to happen. Tennessee's got to do both. It's really just a balancing act of which way you go with that. So, like if you only sign 15 guys, that can work out because 2 years later, you usually have fewer than 15 left anyway. I mean, you lose about half of the guys within 2 years. You sign 25, the 2 years later, you're going to have like 13 of them left. So if you sign 15 a year, that can work out as long as you're hitting on almost all of those. Which if you're only signing, let's say 4 stars and 5 stars, there's a better case of that. And you can always replenish through the portal. You can go too portal heavy to the point where you have no continuity. And that can happen with what happened at Florida State a year before last, where everything just collapsed in 1 year because there was no continuity. So there are success stories in either of these cases. There are failures in either of these cases. I think Heupel does not love change. I mean, we know that with his coaching staff over the years. He likes to retain guys. But we saw this offseason that if there's an emergency, if it's essential, he will make the necessary cuts. He did it with the staff. He can do it with his roster. And, I think they added a good number of transfers this offseason. I think there's so many elements to this. One of them is that it's cheaper to retain players than it is to go get players. I mean, there's a budgetary NIL element in this. And I'll just tease that. Maybe next week, certainly in the future episodes, because we got to wrap this one up. But we're going to dig into NIL strategy, maybe transfer portal strategy, but more NIL strategy. Whether or not Danny White can allocate more funds to Tennessee, some misunderstandings about why that's not necessarily his call, some misunderstandings of how NIL works, and some reasonable complaints about how Tennessee managed the transfer portal because they had the money, but they were slow. And I think we saw that with the quarterback. They were not deliberate. They were too slow. That cost them with a handful of guys. But there's a lot to talk about that probably in next week's episode. We'll see what happens between now and then. Follow all of our coverage of the Vols at KnoxNews.com. Share this podcast with your fellow UT fans. We'd love for you to subscribe as well, just to make sure you never miss an episode. And thanks for listening to this episode of The Volunteer State.